Why is there widespread public anger and protest in the Lebanon? Why has Beirut explosion caused it? Let me explain to you through the sequence of events that has resulted in the current crisis in the country. Lebanon's Prime Minister Hassan Diab announced his government's resignation after a huge explosion that ripped through the Beirut city, causing unprecedented public outrage. On August 6th, French President Emmanuel Macron visited the blast scene in Beirut and warned that without reform, change and action against corruption, the country could start running out of fuel and food within months. And he also warned by saying, and that will be fault of those who refuse to act today. On August 8th PM, Diab had announced early election in the country, saying that's the only way out of this crisis and turmoil. By then, protesters had already started coming in huge number on the streets. On August 9th, country's information minister Manal Abdel Samad became the first one to submit her resignation, saying that the country had reached a point of no return. She also said that Diab's government had failed to live up to people's expectations. Her resignation was followed by Environmental Minister Damianasu Katra's resignation on the same day. Next day, on August 10th, head of the UN Food Agency said that he was very concerned because Lebanon could run out of bread in less than 3 weeks. Around 85% of country's grain came through that Beirut's devastated port in the explosions. Now reports suggest that UN has sent 50,000 tons of wheat to Lebanon to avert the food crisis. On 10th August itself, country's PM Diab also announced his government's resignation on live TV. He said that he was taking a step back so he could stand with the people and fight the battle for change alongside them. President Maj Aoun accepted the resignation and said Diab to continue in a caretaker capacity until new government is formed in the country. Prime Minister Hassan Diab blamed endemic corruption for the devastating explosion last week that tore through the capital. Tensions and unrest have been boiling over in the country after this massive explosion blast at Beirut's port that killed some 200 people and wounded more than 6,000 others. That catastrophic Beirut blast on August 4th have ignited the current anti-government protests in Lebanon. Since 8th of August, thousands of protesters started taking to streets and started protesting. The protesters gathered and pelted stones in central Beirut, where Lebanon's parliament is located. The demonstrations and protests that began peacefully have now turned into violence form. These violent anti-establishment protests have so far wounded more than around 728 people. Reports also suggest that one police officer has been killed in the crackdown so far. The police have been using and launching tear gas on the protesters to disperse them, but protesters have been pelting stones and firecrackers at the police officials trying to control the violence. The protesters also gathered at Lebanon's foreign, economy and environment ministries to vent their anger and frustration as per the reports. Why the Beirut explosion has reignited protests? The recent explosion in Beirut was caused by 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate stored for 6 years in a warehouse in the city's port. This negligence by officials and the government has sparked widespread public anger and protest. The current protests are the turning point or flashpoint of the protests that began in October 2019 itself. Reports suggest that Beirut explosion has caused $3 billion damage. The country was also facing collective loss of an estimated $15 billion. Many parts of the city are devastated. There are many past issues like country's economic downturn, currency crisis, large-scale shutting down of businesses of large and small scale, and soaring prices of basic commodities and products that have resulted in the social unrest and turmoil in the country. Anger over the Beirut incident and blast came out on the streets, with thousands demanding major reforms and changes in the country. For many common Lebanese, the explosion and blast was the last tipping point of anger over the collapse of economy, corruption and dysfunctional governance and the system in the country. So are these protests new, or this is the boiling point? The protests in the Lebanon started in October 2019 itself, after the government had announced plans for new taxes during 2020 budget session on everything from tobacco to social media platforms like WhatsApp. Yes, you heard that right. The public anger had escalated and expanded then also. There were protests against unstable economy, sectarian rule, unemployment, corruption and many other things The protests continued for weeks and then retreated for a while. In March itself this year, like all other countries in the world, Lebanon also imposed and put a state of emergency and bans in the country to fight and combat coronavirus. This caused economic crisis and affected currency's value negatively. During this emergency, protest camps were removed and restrictions were imposed on public gatherings in the country. People understood these moves by government as an attempt to suppress protests and dissent. All these incidents of protests since October last year due to unstable economy, unemployment, corruption, price hike, bad governance and the recent Beirut blast have resulted in the current protests and turmoil in the Lebanon.